Welcome back, Factually Football listeners. It is that time again. Andrew, Cody, and I took a little break last week, if you will. Had to actually go and work and earn my paycheck last week, so was out of the country doing a little work. But happy to be back with you this week. Really going to kind of take a look at the AFC South and the cut down and what that really means for a lot of teams. Obviously, we are Indianapolis Colts folks here, so have a pretty deep dive there, but also talk about some of the different things that have gone on so far. The cut down, just for a reminder, is 4 p.m. tomorrow, which is Tuesday. So the teams have until 4 p.m. to get their roster down to 53. There are different exceptions. I'll call out a Colts exception that I'm aware of right now, which is they have an international player in Marcel Debo, so they can be at 54 if he remains on the roster. So there are some nuances to that, but I feel like this part of the year always has some fairly intriguing cuts, as we were just talking offline here a little bit. So we decided to go live and kind of chat with you all. Anything to add to that, guys, before we get right into some of the teams?
All good here. Happy to be back after having a week off, if you will. Always enjoy jumping on and talking NFL football with you guys, and I'm ready to roll.
Absolutely, same.
So, for this week, I'm going to save the Colts for last here, but I'd love to we were talking about it a little off air. Love to get some of you guys' thoughts on Jacksonville's trade today. And what do you think that means? What does that mean for their roster makeup? And for those of you who don't know, Laviska Shenault was traded to Carolina this afternoon off of that roster here for Jacksonville. But love to get you guys' take on that and have a little chat on that.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little shocked. They do have three really solid receivers, I think, in Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Marvin Jones. Maybe they view Jamal Agnew as kind of a Tavon Austin, like poor man's Tyreek Hill type of role. And they've got Evan Ingram, who is he's a tight end, but he's, as fast as some receivers and can certainly stretch the field, vertically. So they have some weapons there. Shenault, second-round pick, I think had a couple solid seasons. Wasn't awful in the time that, I had to watch him. And I think there were times where he struggled to get open, and I think he maybe struggled to develop a little bit. And I almost wonder if having Matt Rule as your head coach, somebody that's I guess known for being an offensive guy and having a new quarterback in Baker Mayfield, maybe that'll help his development.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I wonder if, it was more on Shenault than anybody who, looks at that depth chart and he's like, hey, look, I'm probably not even going to crack the top three. So, makes the decision, hey, I want a fresh start somewhere, a place like Carolina that probably, could use him and use his abilities a little bit more. And so, yeah, as far as just the player himself and everything, it's just, it just seemed like he never really lived up to the hype that people had when they came out. Felt like he had some nice moments his rookie year, but also, he was still a rookie. So, there were some things that people were just like, yeah, we'll just give him another year, see what he does. And, all that to say, I never felt like he was that special of a player. And, I definitely think obviously now draft bust for Jacksonville. Seems like they've had a lot of those, CJ Henderson, another guy that they recently, drafted highly and traded away for virtually nothing. So yeah, my goodness, Laviska Shenault certainly has talent, but at this point in his career, I don't really feel like he's lived up to that. So I don't know how much of a loss it is necessarily for Jacksonville, given what they've done this offseason to improve that wide receiver core.
Yeah, and I think a name, again, as we are wont to do here, covering the whole division, I think a name to look at is a guy who kind of broke out this preseason. I think it almost made Laviska Shenault expendable, if you will, and that's Tim Jones out of Southern Miss. Every year it seems like there's we'll call it a preseason darling for most teams. And this year for Jacksonville, I really think it was Tim Jones. They obviously went out and drafted guys like Kevin Austin out of Notre Dame and things of that nature. They've had Jeff Cotton for a while, who's never really panned out. But Tim Jones caught 14 of 17 balls. So kind of like you said, it's almost an embarrassment of riches. And, I think another thing that I'll be intrigued to see from a cut down perspective is right now they have 4 running backs on the roster. And I think they'd be hard pressed to cut any more running backs. I'm looking at their count right now and trying to understand that. But I mean, Mekhi Sargent fills a unique role for them because they've obviously got James Robinson and Etienne. James Robinson's got that. He's a little banged up. And then they've got Snoop Connor coming in out of Ole Miss who had a decent preseason as well. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my initial knee jerks. As I said, a lot more will come in, but Jacksonville, I would say, is probably the most active team so far. A lot of folks will wait till the last second to kind of see how everything breaks down, but Jacksonville was clearly decided internally on where they wanted to go. So no other really big names there. Raquel Armstead's a running back they've had for a while that they cut as well, but nothing crazy. They cut their second kicker of the offseason as well. So, as we look at some other teams in the division, you've got Tennessee as well. Been fairly quiet at this point. Nothing, I don't want to say nothing of note, but I mean, when you're talking about cutting a punter and Brett Kearns and a safety and Adrian Colbert so far at 9 p.m. the Monday night before, I don't know that there's a lot to talk about. But what did you guys think about Tennessee's preseason? What was your biggest takeaway from Tennessee?
Yeah, for me, it's got to be. I still have some concerns about that receiving core. I think Treylon Burks, when targeted, has looked okay. Kyle Phillips, again, when targeted, has looked okay. I'll be honest and say that I haven't really watched a ton of Titans preseason football. I will say from what I've seen, Malik Willis, it's really early, but I think he brings something to Tennessee that they don't have. And I know Ryan Tannehill's mobile, but I would venture to say that Willis is probably 2 times as fast as Tannehill. And when you have that kind of explosiveness at the quarterback position, again, that just brings something different to your offense in general. It can maybe open up maybe some RPOs, read option type stuff. If you bring Willis in the game and you have, one of the best backs in the league in Derrick Henry, you have to account for him too. And that's sort of how you can keep the defense honest. As far as, their team is concerned, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse, if you will, but that receiving core, I mean, I have to see it to believe it. And right now, what I'm seeing is very, very troubling. I would say, because you're going in the preseason against second, third, and sometimes even fourth string players. I mean, team players rather that won't be on the team in the next 24 hours. And if you can't get open and can't show positive strides as a receiver against third, fourth string players, are you going to be able to do it against the best of the best? They're going against the AFC West, top corners there. Colts have Kenny Moore and Stephon Gilmore, former Defensive Player of the Year. Jacksonville has Shaquille Griffin, former Seattle Seahawk, who played well last season. And Houston, they just drafted Derek Stingley. I mean, obviously there's more to it than just those players, but again, that's where my concerns are.
Yeah, I would add Tennessee also. I don't know if you guys saw this or not, but they actually just made a trade about a half an hour ago from when we launched. They traded a 5th-round pick to the Panthers. The Panthers gave him offensive lineman Dennis Daly and a 7th-round pick. So Tennessee, trying to beef up that offensive line. Now, from some of the comments and some of the people I've seen, it doesn't seem like Daly necessarily is a good player. So a lot of people are thinking, man, the Titans just got fleeced. As fleeced as you can get, I guess, from giving away a 5th-round pick. But, on top of that, that's just another thing that happened as well, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, I echo everything that Andrew just said. Malik Willis, the early returns look good on him, but again, it is preseason. Everybody, it's such a weird time of year, guys, because it's like everybody gets so hyped up, whether it's positively or negatively, right, in the preseason. I think there's some things, obviously some positives you take from that, some things you hold on to, but also I think, it's not like these, it's not like Malik Willis is probably going to see the field anytime soon. So you want to see what you got with some of those guys like the Treylon Burks and some of those guys as well. But early indications, I think, have been good for both those guys, at least early on so far in camp and preseason and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the Dennis Daly move, and as I kind of scroll through here, I mean, this is a guy who rated out at 36.4 last year on PFF on pass blocking. Now, weird, he's got a 61.3 run block, and we know what Tennessee likes to do, right? So maybe that's kind of their thoughts there. But I almost look at that as an indictment on the young tackles that they have on the roster. I mean, last year they went out and got Dylan Raduns from North Dakota State, who, in fairness, I really wanted the Colts to take a peek at. And then this year it was Nicholas Petit-Frere from Ohio State. Is that move of Daly almost an indictment on them and what they feel they have there? It's kind of interesting. Again, I mean, I think the rich get richer almost at running back. Hassan Haskins looked pretty good in preseason as well. Again, we're talking preseason. But another guy that's kind of interesting, we'll see if he makes the roster, is this Julius Chestnut kid who had a fairly decent preseason run for them. So we've held off long enough to talk about the dumpster fire that is the Houston Texans. So again, Texans fans, you're probably going to want to tune out about now. But, again, this team kind of, to me, did everything that I expected them to do in preseason. They won games that didn't matter. That's not really a shot, but I don't know that I saw anything I didn't expect to see necessarily. They still are completely confused at running back. Even just today, I saw the coach come out and say, "Hey, we haven't announced Damien Pierce as the starting running back. I think for our buddy, the ex-Colt Marlon Mack, I think that's a good thing because I do think that Mack looked fairly fresh when I saw him the couple snaps that I saw this year. But I mean, we talked about what does Tennessee have at receiver, but I got to be honest, how long are we going to talk about Brandon Cooks being there and he's kind of like their savior? I just don't see it in Houston. Seems almost counterfeit that they won 3 games, but I think it also speaks to how little people should pay attention to win-loss in the preseason. What if any do you guys think about about Houston here?
Yeah, not a ton of note, right? Not a ton to really look at and be necessarily amazed about. But yeah, I mean, definitely, I would say, even though they haven't made a definite decision, I think Damien Pierce is definitely their RB1 and should be, moving forward. It seems like he's definitely been standing out from what I hear. And Derek Stingley seems like he's having a good preseason and camp and stuff. So yeah, Houston's still a couple years away from, obviously competing and stuff. I do think they have a couple nice young rookies. We'll see, how that translates, obviously, when the rubber meets the road here in a couple weeks and, week 1 of the regular season is actually underway. But yeah, I mean, right now, Houston, it is what it is. You don't really know what you have in your quarterback. You don't really know what you have in your running back, although you like him, outside of Cooks, like you mentioned. Who do you have at this point? There's not a whole lot there for Houston. There's a few potential building blocks, but nothing definite yet.
Yeah, I echo everything Cody said. And then some. I think Pierce has looked really solid from the little action I've seen him play. I think he's absolutely earned the right to be their first string running back moving forward. Receiver wise, again, kind of like you guys said, how often are we going to bring up Brandon Cooks? I like Nico Collins. I like, what we saw in small glimpses last year. I think that there may be something there. And if Davis Mills, as we mentioned before, can progress going into year 2, then Houston may have found themselves a quarterback going forward. But you're asking a lot of, putting it on the shoulders of Mills to work with a very patchwork offensive line outside of your Pro Bowl left tackle Laramie Tunsil, in a running game led by a rookie, albeit as we've mentioned, who stood out a little bit in the preseason, and a receiving core that is really outside of Brandon Cooks unproven. Defensively, there's a couple of nice pieces. I think Ross Blacklock has had a nice preseason, former second-round pick, I believe, for them a draft or two ago. And, Derek Stingley, as Cody had mentioned, is also having a nice preseason and has stood out in camp from the things that I've seen. So aside from those particular players, there isn't any really anything that comes to mind.
All right, boys, we officially did it. 15 minutes of coverage on the other part of the AFC South, and now we get to dive a little deep here when it comes to this Colts roster. I've been the one banging the drum all preseason, and it caught on pretty quick. But I think we probably keep 3 quarterbacks, but in fairness, we should probably only keep 2, and Nick Foles isn't one of those 2, in my opinion. I feel like he's going to hold the clipboard, and Sam Ehlinger is the guy that would come in if actually Matt Ryan got hurt. That's just my opinion here. And I think in the backfield, we kind of got a little dose of what it's probably going to be, right? This week, Jonathan Taylor and Hines sat, and we saw Phillip Lindsay and Dion Jackson get the touches with Devontae Price and Tyson Williams coming in late. I think that puts Tyson Williams on the outside looking in, and I could see the Colts maybe practice squatting Devontae Price, the young kid out of FIU. What do you guys have to say about those couple positions? And then we'll just kind of roll through some other offensive positions till we get to the defense.
For me, I understand, and I guess we can maybe talk more in depth about Sam Ehlinger and the preseason that he's had, which has been nothing short of exceptional. That was one of my takeaways in the article I wrote for Stampede Blue yesterday. If you haven't checked that out, be sure to do so. StampedeBlue.com. The article is what we learned from the Colts and Bucks preseason game for Week 3. But Nick Foles, from my understanding, is the backup. The Colts, Frank Reich especially, believes that if Matt Ryan were to get injured, Nick Foles coming in, that he can still play and play at a high level, and that there maybe isn't as significant of a drop-off as some may believe. So Nick Foles, regardless of how he's looked in the preseason, is 110%. The second-string quarterback, I can tell you that for a fact. But as far as the roster cuts that I'm kind of maybe surprised by, or maybe would be surprised by, I should say, no names really come to mind. I will say there are a couple of players that have stood out. JoJo Domann, Sterling Weatherford have played really, really sound football when given the opportunity for the Colts. And I think that the linebacker depth, minus Darius Leonard, Zaire Franklin, and Bobby Okereke, is pretty thin. EJ Speed is in there. I think he's had a solid preseason, but a guy like Sterling Weatherford and maybe even JoJo Domann could provide dividends for this Colts linebacking core if Okereke or Leonard or Franklin, the starters, were to miss any time. So those are 2 names that I'm kind of looking forward. It makes sense for them to make the roster, but I guess we'll see when the time comes.
Yeah, as it relates to the running backs, I do think, I think Lindsey is firmly your RB3 at this point. I think there's no question about that. And I do think the Colts, out of all those, slew of running backs trying to go for RB4, if the Colts do keep 4, which I think is a good possibility, I do think, Dion Jackson, just with the run that he got with the ones, and he made some plays, when he was given the opportunity. I think that definitely served him well, and his stock was up from that game. And I think he's honestly, guys, the RB4 because he's had a year in the system. He knows what it looks like. He's had a little bit more experience, which I think gives him a slight edge over guys like Tyson Williams, and all those other guys, Devontae Price, and some of those other guys competing for that RB4 position. So I think that's kind of the things I've learned so far. is just kind of talking about the running backs. That's kind of where I've kind of thought it was going to go, especially at RB3. RB4 was a little bit more of a surprise because I thought, honestly, one of those other running backs might get the look. I thought, is Dion Jackson going to potentially be on his way out, or is he going to be a practice squad guy? But I want to credit him. It seems like he's been putting in good work, and he's now, if the Colts do keep 4, I think he's firmly in that RB4 position there.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry, I meant to address this earlier. I don't know why I went to linebackers, but I did. As far as running backs go, I 100% agree with what Cody said. I think Phillip Lindsay provides something, for you, in a former Pro Bowler, had 2,000-yard seasons with the Denver Broncos, as we've mentioned. He's looked really good in camp. He's looked really good when he's been given reps in the preseason. And then Dion Jackson had, solid preseason performance against Tampa Bay. He's looked solid in both areas as well, both preseason and training camp. And I think if they do keep 4, I agree. It's going to be Taylor Hines, Lindsay, and then Dion Jackson as well.
So, unfortunate thing we kind of got, I think it was the end of last week, right? Was that Ogletree injury. Because that kid had just looked so solid. So really, shout out Andrew if you happen to listen, but hope you get better. But I think when we talk about roster makeup, one of the things that's almost intriguing here is I think they only now definitely keep 3 tight ends tops. And I think you've got, Granson, Mo Alley, and Jelani kind of locked into that, in my opinion. But I think where that makes a little intrigue is what they do at offensive line. Do they keep an extra lineman in you guys' eyes, offensive lineman, because of that? Do they keep a kid like a Seltzner from Wisconsin? Do they keep, Van Demark from UConn, who in fairness, I don't think has looked that good? Or do they keep a kid like Jordan Murray, who's been in the league for a while? Actually, I'm sorry, he hasn't been in the league for a while, but he's looked fairly decent in his short stints for the Colts. What do you guys just thought on what that means from a tight end perspective in relation to what it means for how many offensive line guys we keep?
Yeah, I think if you're the Colts, my bet is 3 tight ends. You have Mo Alley Cox, Kylan Granson, and Jelani Woods. I was drawing a blank on his name for a second. Sorry. Jelani Woods. Perhaps they keep a 4th tight end. I mean, as far as the offensive line is concerned, I sort of feel like Tampa Bay was a little revealing when the Colts were going against the Bucs' first-string defense. You had Danny Pinter at center, and you had Will Fries at guard. And Fries struggled, and Pinter, I think, struggled a little bit. There might have been a miscommunication between he and Quentin Nelson, which obviously allowed Ryan to get sacked there on that play. But the offensive line depth has been a concern for, I think, a lot of different people that have been paying attention to the Colts. I don't think that they're done addressing it. We know Chris Ballard has been one to kind of dip into the free agency pool in terms of players that have been cut and try and find some more notable kind of under the radar players. You look at guys like Kenny Moore and Al-Qadim Muhammad, guys that he's gotten off of waivers in years past. So do I think they're done addressing the depth of the offensive line? No, I don't. But I think they need to potentially maybe look at bringing in a veteran if one is available. Aside from Dennis Kelly, your interior of the offensive line, depth-wise especially, is really unproven, and that is something to monitor, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I think as far as it goes with tight ends, I'm right there with you. I think you keep 3 of the 3 that you mentioned. I think for offensive line, I do think there could be potentially a move there, and I think there probably should be. I was kind of surprised a couple weeks ago when the Colts released Jason Spriggs, who I thought was going to make this team and I thought was going to be a nice contributor in there. And so it definitely seems like that could be something that could be in play. But I think as far as the tight ends go, I don't know if they keep more offensive linemen necessarily. I just think that I've always kind of had them keeping 9 guys. But I think one thing I would definitely like to see them, I think maybe it more impacts like okay, now do you keep maybe 4 running backs or do you keep 6 wide receivers? I think it more impacts that than, to me, the offensive line.
That's fair. And, I guess I kind of skipped over the receivers there. Wow, I can't believe I did that. I mean, I think going into camp here, I mentally had a couple guys locked in. We obviously know Pittman. We obviously know Paris Campbell, as long as he stayed healthy. And for all intents and purposes, sounds like he did. All was good. He came out of that game well. Obviously, the rookie Alec Pierce has done some decent things in preseason. So that gets you to 3. Some intriguing things that, in my opinion, have kind of come up is I think you're fighting 3 more spots between Strawn, Patman, Kiki QT, and I think maybe Samson Nakua gets in there. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Do you think they keep 3 or do you think they keep 5? Do you think they keep 6 or do you think they keep 5 here? And your thoughts on Nakua? I know he was kind of quiet, but I just feel like his size brings, yet another level to this core.
Go ahead, Cody.
So one guy you didn't mention, Adam, that I think he's a lock to make the roster is Ashton Doolin at 4. I think he's definitely offers you some versatility and, in his receiving game. And also he's a core special teamer for you. So I think for 5 and 6, I do think they keep 6. I'm going Desmond Patman, who I think has looked really good the last 2 preseason games. And then I'm going, actually, surprisingly, a lot of people would hit Michael Strawn here. I'm going Kiki Kuti because of what he offers you in the return game. He looked really, really good outside of the one muffed kick that he had. He looked really good in the return game. And I kind of look at him also like potential Paris Campbell insurance, because Campbell's proven he hasn't played, a full season since he's been in the league. So odds are he's going to at least miss a couple games. So I'd like to have a proven guy in there that I feel pretty good about. And I do feel like Michael Strawn's a guy that will pass through waivers since he is coming off that injury, and he hasn't had like a Desmond Patman type of game. Although I thought he looked really good in the 3rd game, he hasn't had like the, oh my goodness, kind of plays yet in the preseason. So, and I don't blame him because he's just came back from injury, right? He's a little over a week away or a week, removed from being off of the PUP list. So yeah, I mean, definitely think they keep 6, and I think it rounds out for 5 and 6 for me with Desmond Patman and Kiki QT, but Michael Strawn could potentially be in play there for the 6th position as well.
Yeah, I'm in a full agreement. I think they keep 6. Maybe instead of keeping an extra offensive lineman, which would not be like Chris Ballard because we know how much he values the O-line and D-line, maybe they instead keep that extra that extra receiver in place of an extra offensive lineman. But I really think I think when you look at the depth behind, as you were kind of mentioning, Cody, Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell, there aren't really a ton of proven guys. Alec Pierce, obviously a rookie, has shown some flashes, but we'll see, if he can translate that to, regular season play, if you will, against some of the better corners in the league. I, too, like the value that Kiki QT brings from a special team standpoint, as well as, being a veteran. He's had some valuable reps for Houston in the past. And I think if a guy like Paris Campbell, as you kind of mentioned, Cody, goes down or isn't able to play all 17 games, I think you have some proven insurance in a guy like QT. Desmond Patton and Michael Strawn, I think, have both done everything that they possibly can to earn a spot on this 53-man roster. I don't think the Colts have gone with 6 receivers in the last couple of years, if my memory serves correct. But I think this is the year that they would, just because I think they all fit the mold of what the Colts like, of what Chris Ballard likes. They all obviously have different and various skill sets, but I think it's something that the Colts need. If they don't keep 6 and they only keep 5, maybe they go out and look at adding a veteran receiver as the 6th piece, and then they have Desmond Patton or Michael Strawn, go on the practice squad. But at this point, I think again, I think Patman and Strawn have done enough to earn a spot, in my opinion, on the 53-man roster, and then the other 4 are kind of no-brainers in Pittman, Pierce, Campbell, and Doolin, and then I guess you have QT in there as well. So perhaps maybe QT over Patman. My mistake.
Yeah, and I'm an idiot. I completely forgot about Doolin for some ungodly reason. In fairness, I don't feel like we saw him a ton in preseason, so I think that may be why he escaped my brain there. But my apologies to the listeners. All right, let's dig into defense here, fellas. I'm going to start on the D-line because we saw a game this week from Ben Banigou, in fairness, that we've been waiting to see for 2 years now. I get it. Look, it's the preseason. He didn't go against the best competition. Just throw all the excuses out there that you want to throw out there. But do you guys think he did enough to earn a roster spot, or do you think he did enough to possibly be trade bait? We talked about Chris Ballard kind of maneuvering usually right here at this roster cut or right around the roster cut time. What do you guys think? And I know this is very specific question-wise, but I mean, what did you think about that game from him?
Yeah, for me personally, I and this might come as a surprise, I haven't seen enough. I mean, he's shown some flashes, but I don't think he's hasn't had much looks with the first string defense, with the ones, if you will. In preseason or in training camp. I think he's ran with mainly the 2 and 3s. But for me, it's I just don't think I've seen enough. That's not to say that he can't play or that he's a bad player. Perhaps they move him to the practice squad. Obviously somebody else could unless they protect him, offer, make him an offer, I should say. Or he could go elsewhere if he's cut. So for me, from the little bit I've seen, I was impressed. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't. If I didn't come away with, some solid impressions of how he performed against Tampa Bay. But overall, when I look at the entirety of his preseason and in training camp, to me, there's just not enough for him to earn a spot along that defensive line, especially with how deep it is right now, particularly at edge, and maybe not so much on the interior.
Yeah, guys, I'm going to be honest. Like, I look at this defensive end position, and I did think he had a nice game on Saturday, but honestly, I think it might be too little too late. That's been my question mark. Is it? And guys, when I look at it, I mean, I'll look at all my defensive ends. I have 4 defensive ends, I have, if you count Dio as defensive end, I have 5 defensive ends ahead of him. And that includes Ifedi Odengbo as well. So I think he's looked better. I think he's been more consistent, and he's had production in the league. So I look at it like that. And initially on my, final 53-man roster, I had him making it. But, and I'm sure we'll talk about it here in a minute, I do feel like there's another, impending move that's going to potentially happen on the interior that'll probably push him off the roster. So right now, guys, he is the last defensive end out of some of the guys that, I want to keep on the roster that have a chance. I really think a realistic chance that I'm going to keep. And that stinks because I really was hoping, that he would show some things, and he did to some degree, but I was wanting more. I was hoping the change in scheme would do something, and in some ways it did, but I don't think it was enough, honestly. And I think the Colts have, and I think the Colts are in a good position now where they don't have to wait on Ben Banigou to break out anymore, where they can afford to either outright release him, or they can, potentially look to trade him. As it stands right now, guys, there's 5 defensive ends that I have right now ahead of him. And so I don't know if the Colts would keep 6. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, if I just may add one more thing too. I think when the Colts go out and they kind of not necessarily go out of their way, so to speak, but they go out and they draft a Dio Odengbo coming off an Achilles injury, no less. Somebody that they obviously liked a lot, coming out of the draft. And then they go out and get the other Odengbo who played in Minnesota that, as we mentioned before, I think 7.5 sacks a couple of seasons ago. So he brings some veteran experience. You like what Tyquan Lewis can bring if he's healthy. I feel like the writing is kind of on the wall, and this is kind of Banagou's last shot. And as we've all kind of maybe mentioned, he hasn't really, I think, done enough. So I guess we'll see come tomorrow.
So, Cody, I'd be a little curious. You're talking 5 defensive ends here. You know, if I'm throwing out my defensive linemen, let's say that I think make this roster, I've got Curtis Brooks, I've got Grover Stewart, I've got DeForest Buckner. I've more than likely got Eric Johnson, but you could probably sway me possibly to RJ McIntosh here. And then on the edge, I've got Taekwon, I've got Ngakoue, I've got Pay, I've got Dio. Who do you have as your 5th D end, especially with Lewis and Dio being, I don't want to say interchangeable, being able to play both the tackle and the edge? What is kind of your thought for your 5, Cody?
Yeah, I had Ifedi Adenigbo as my number 5 because I also feel like he can play a little bit interior if he needs to. And I feel like the same is true for Dio. The same is true for Taekwon Lewis. So actually, surprisingly, in my 53-man roster prediction, I only kept 3 interior defensive linemen, knowing their versatility and knowing that there was probably a move coming. And I kept Banagou initially, but my thought was, okay, whenever that move inevitably probably comes, the Colts are probably would look to, get rid of an end there. So that was kind of my thought process through it. Maybe it didn't make a whole lot of sense for people, but I kind of think that's where I'm going to go in terms of defensive linemen, because I do think they'll look. And initially I had Eric Johnson. I think I might switch that, and I actually would go Curtis Brooks because he's more of that, could be potentially more of that pass rusher, less because he's a little bit smaller. And, maybe have Eric Johnson be like a practice squad guy if the Colts go and get, a proven vet like a Malcolm Brown, or dare I say even a Taylor Stallworth if he does get released by Kansas City. Just somebody like that that's really good against the run and has proven to be really good against the run that can, really help you feel a little bit better, especially considering how bad your run defense has been on the interior of that backup defensive line. So that was kind of my thought process with it. It wasn't necessarily like going to be the final 53-man roster per se. Like it was more like, who are the guys you want to just keep immediately, right? Because if we're talking Banagou for trade bait potentially, I'll keep him on the roster initially, and maybe then I trade him away, or then I just outright cut him and put him on the practice squad, or whatever we do there. That was kind of my process through it.
That's fair. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. I could see that happening, right? Because we talk about Taekwon, we talk about Dio, and kind of their interchangeability. With that being said, I think I have us keeping six linebackers, right? I think Doman's done enough to stay. I think you're, for lack of a better term, you're locked with Okirike, EJ Speed, Shaq Leonard, and Zaire with those 4. And I mean, I just don't know how you hold Sterling Weatherford back and not put him on the roster. I think he's a guy based on, he was a collegiate safety. Let's not forget about that, right, guys? But he's playing in that outside linebacker. And in fairness, I feel like we've been crying for a pass defending coverage linebacker. And I feel like Weatherford could bring that to this team. What are your thoughts on those 6? And did I kick anybody out that you guys would put on there?
Yeah, for me, Sterling Weatherford, I think absolutely, as I mentioned earlier, has earned a spot on the 53-man roster. No question. I mean, he had 9 solo tackles, 10 total tackles last week against Tampa Bay. Third, fourth string players, that to me doesn't matter. If you can make plays, you can make plays. Weatherford's had a really nice training camp. He's backed it up in the preseason. He absolutely, in my mind, has earned a spot. I think JoJo Doman maybe ends up on the practice squad. I think he can maybe contribute a little more on special teams, which maybe gives him an advantage over a guy like Weatherford. But, if I'm Chris Ballard and I have to pick between the two, I think you have more value in a guy like Weatherford, as I mentioned earlier, with very little linebacking depth this behind the starters other than maybe EJ Speed. And Weatherford, I think, just brings just a very unique skill set that I wouldn't say maybe is necessarily replaceable, if a guy like Okirike or Leonard or Franklin go down. But I think he's shown enough to where you maybe feel slightly more comfortable having him start if needed, as opposed to if he didn't make the roster.
Yeah, I'm going 6 linebackers as well, Adam. I'm obviously going Leonard, Okereke, Speed, Franklin, but I'm keeping Weatherford and Doman. Both of them I feel like have shown out. And honestly, you can make a case for the other 2 guys as well, the other undrafted guys, that have started to make some plays for Shrine. And the other one is slipping my mind right now, but I thought he had some nice plays too.
James Skalsky.
Yes, there we go. James Skalsky. I thought he's played really well and looked good too. But I think if you're making me choose between, the 4, if I only had to choose 2, it'd be definitely Weatherford. And then I think Doman has shown you enough where he'll kind of be that last linebacker on the final 53 man. I have no issue, especially with the question about Leonard's availability for week 1 and potentially even further, adding a little bit more in terms of linebacker depth. I think that will only serve to help you out.
Yeah, and interesting, I was just looking up Weatherford's stats, and I'll read his stat line for preseason. Again, we had a session called Overreaction Monday, so that's not where I'm going here. But the kid had 18 solos, 3 assists, 1 interception. And if you look at how he graded out at an 89.2 by PFF overall, with very high numbers at 84.6 in coverage, which quite honestly, we don't have another guy on the roster currently that's ever graded out over a 65 in coverage. And I think that's where he plays so heavily here. But sorry, Sterling, if you're listening, I've completely tooted your horn. So I just need you to go out and back it up. But let's move on to the defensive backfield. And I'll talk about who kind of I think is going to stay. Obviously, the unfortunate injury to Armani Watts this week, which does put him in season-ending scenario. The Colts traditionally don't keep a mass amount. In the past, sometimes they've kept 5 in the safety room. Marcel Debo will just kind of leave him out because he does get the international exception here. But I think they keep Rodney Thomas, Julian Blackmon, Nick Cross, and Rodney McLeod here in that safety room. I think that gives you a nice 4. I think Will Redmond's decent, but I don't know that he showed me enough. And I think some of the versatility you could have if you keep a guy like Marvell Tell, who did play collegiate safety, may have you only keeping 4. Rodney Thomas is obviously a kind of I don't want to call him a project because I don't know that that's fair, but he is a little bit of a project, right? He's a 7th round draft pick. It's his first year in the NFL. But then at cornerback, you've got some guys that are locked in. Brandon Faison to me is locked in. Isaiah Rodgers locked in. Kenny Moore's locked in. And obviously Stephon Gilmore is locked in. My question to you guys is, did Dallas Flowers do enough in this offseason? And I'm not just talking about last game because I've been watching him, quite honestly, throughout this offseason, and we talk so much about special teams and how valuable that is and what a value that the Colts specifically place on that. When you've got a guy like Luke Rhodes who's been on the team forever, and in reality, he doesn't really do anything but snap the ball. Has Dallas Flowers done enough to stay on this roster, or is he that far outside looking in here to make the 53?
Oh, I think he has. I have Dallas Flowers making it. I also have Anthony Chesley making it, a guy that, was with the Colts last year and I thought looked really strong in the final preseason game. And both those guys, I believe, can play special teams. Definitely Flowers can. I think Chesley can as well. So that just adds tremendous value, I think, over a guy like Marvell Tell. So I had the Colts keeping 6 there, and I agree with you, Adam. I had the Colts keeping 4 safeties, the exact same that you talked about, especially with that injury to Armani Watts, unfortunate injury on that first play of the Tampa Bay game. So I had them keeping Blackmon and Thomas at free safety, Cross and McLeod, the strong safety. Guys, I was encouraged with what I saw to Rodney Thomas. We haven't heard a whole lot from him necessarily. And then when he kind of played a little bit more and got more opportunity at free safety, I thought he looked pretty good. Obviously, he talked about still very raw in a lot of areas, but I like what I see with him. He's a physically gifted guy. When the Colts took him, we all know this draft specifically was very RAS based, very, very athletic. And Rodney Thomas was one of those guys that was, a little bit later on in the draft, but still had a lot of athletic traits that you like. So I'm really actually encouraged and excited to see what he can do and how he can grow and how he can learn behind a guy like Julian Blackmon, because I think he has a lot of potential there, guys, at that backup free safety position.
I completely agree. I think Dallas Flowers, to answer the original question, has done enough to earn a spot. Anthony Chesley, I think, has improved from where he was a year ago. As Cody mentioned, he was with the Colts last year. I think he actually saw some time against Baltimore. I don't think it was great in terms of his play. I think he's improved. I think we've seen that growth over the last couple of weeks in preseason. In the Colts cornerback room, outside of Faison, Moore, Gilmore, and I'm drawing a blank on the fourth corner at the moment, is
Isaiah Rodgers.
Isaiah Rodgers. How in the world did I forget Isaiah Rodgers? I think it's because he's been in concussion protocol. Can't forget about him. In no particular order, by the way, were those four. But outside of those four, I think it's fairly thin. So I think you almost have to keep Dallas Flowers and Anthony Chesley. And they've played well for you when given the opportunity. Safety-wise, I agree. I think it's Blackmon. I think it's McLeod. I think it's Nick Cross. And Rodney Thomas, I think, also deserves a spot on the 53. I think he played really, really well against Tampa Bay. I think he had 2 tackles, if I'm not mistaken. Nick Cross had Rodney Thomas had 4 tackles. He had back-to-back preseason games in which he's had 4 tackles. And I think that obviously stands out. He has shown, like Chesley and Flowers, a lot of growth. I think a lot of times when you get taken in the 7th round, sometimes regardless of the team, people tend to write 7th round picks off as just, camp bodies or players that may not make the roster. But Thomas has quietly had a solid camp, and he's definitely, earned the right to be on the 53 the last couple of weeks in my mind.
And, for those of you keeping track, the streak does stay alive. That would mean if our ballpark projections are right, as we all sit right now talking through some of this, that means 3 undrafted guys this year make the Colts roster, which seems fairly high. I know that we always have at least 1, but 3, right? Between Weatherford and Doman and then Flowers. So really, really interesting there. As to what this could look like. And I just want to give one kind of almost shout out to Matt Hawk, the guy who came in place of Rigoberto. We all love Rigoberto here. He's done amazing things for us in only being with the team for 5 years, but hopefully he gets back and the recovery as well. But Matt Hawk came in after being cut from Buffalo and their disaster of a punting scenario. And I mean, he looked great in the game this week. It's not often you really think of great when you think of punters necessarily. You hope you don't have to use them that often, but any thoughts on where that leaves us? Because I was pretty concerned, guys, with no Rigo. He's a weapon for us, and not having him had me concerned, but I felt a lot better after that game.
No, we stepped up big time. Matt Hawk played exceptionally well. Of his 5 punts, 4 of them were down inside the 20, and he didn't give up any additional yardage to the opposing returner, which I think speaks to how well he can play. And a punter isn't the most dynamic weapon, if you will, on an NFL team. But the Colts pride themselves on having one of the league's better special teams units, and Rigoberto Sanchez has played a significant role in allowing that team, that core, to become, I think, one of the league's best, arguably. And I think Matt Hawk, if anything, has showed that he can step in and play well as a temporary replacement for Sanchez this season.
Yeah, man, I tell you what, thank goodness for Buffalo's incompetence, because Matt Hawk so far, I thought he was the MVP, guys. He was phenomenal in the first game he had, and a little bit weird to see it come off the left foot instead of the right foot, but I'm sure we'll get used to it. But yeah, I definitely thought that he looked really, really good. And, had so many punts. I believe I had one that was almost 60 yards. That was crazy. I thought he was just phenomenal all day and helps ease, the loss of one of the best punters in football, to have a guy like Matt Hawk who can step in and still perform very well. And clearly still has it, and clearly he still has a leg, and can still, place it, down there within the opponent's 10-yard line. So yeah, I was very encouraged with what I saw from him.
And just because we're all about the stats, I'll throw out some numbers for him this preseason, which are quite impressive, man. Guy had 7 punts this preseason. 6 of them were pinned inside the 20. He had an average gross of 47 yards. His average return that he gave up was 4.3 yards, and they only returned it 42% of the time. So, and about a 4.5 second hang time. So again, as we kind of like jokingly scoffed at here, it is an important part of the game. And to have a guy like that come in, especially with the Matt Araiza thing, and we won't even get into that, that's going on in Buffalo, I feel like we got a little lucky here. So any parting words for the folks before we let them get back to their day here?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing about Matt Hawk. I forgot to mention, Rigoberto, one of his primary things besides kickoffs was holding. And I thought Matt Hawk looked really good in that department. And obviously Hot Rod had no issues. He was perfect on the day. So want to say it was definitely a weird transition, but it's been a good one so far. And I just want to give him credit. Didn't really look like the Colts special teams missed a beat with Matt Hawk in there. And hopefully that continues.
Agreed. And, I just want to say, kind of as I've said at the beginning, appreciate everybody for listening. Appreciate you guys for joining us for another, I think, really, really great episode. It'll be interesting to see what the Colts do, what the rest of the AFC South does at that tomorrow at around 4 p.m. And what are we, 2 weeks away, fellas, from the games actually counting? I am not that I'm keeping track or anything.
Not that I'm keeping track, but it's approximately 13 days. So, have a great weekend, everybody, or a week, everybody. And we will chat with you next week. Bye now.